Well, to say that today brought a big surprise is the understatement of the year. It started yesterday when I received an email from a Jewish rabbi inviting me to be part of a telephone conference call with President Barack Obama on the moral and religious dimensions to the debate over healthcare reform in this country. And while I was flabbergasted at the invitation, it was one I dared not turn down, so I accepted and took the instructions on how to call into this invitation only conversation with the president. I did that, and lo and behold, I ended up the very first one to call in. And that gave me a little bit of an advantage. I was able to listen in to all the banter and discussion and some of the frenetic, even very nervous tension going on in the control room or wherever this call was being staged from, and I could hear staffers and technical people and so on a little bit nervous about this. They got set up finally. The moderator came on, which is typical. I've participated in many of these kind of top level conference calls, and a moderator will come in. She announced that we would hear from a number of religious leaders around the country, which we did. And, because I've not only participated in a lot of these, but I've actually staged a few myself, you can detect a well rehearsed, kind of choreographed conference call, as this one proved to be. And it was quite clear that the people who were talking were, first of all, in full support of the president's position and the proposals coming out of Congress. But also, you could tell they were reading from scripts. Their lines were well rehearsed, probably well vetted, that is, reviewed by the White House and approved or disapproved by them, and therefore edited, or maybe, those who really wanted to get something in just were left off the list. But I will give the White House big credit for this one. There was a rather pointed question posed by a Catholic representative on the question of publicly funded abortion. And while the president wasn't on the line yet, and he didn't come on until very late in the call, another White House official defended the president's position by saying that there is a conscience clause in all their proposals that allows healthcare providers to opt out. And that's a whole discussion in itself, whether that's genuine or not. Now, as far as taking questions or comments, the president took none while he was on the call. In fact, I'm not even sure the lines were open for that. I did have a question, and I tried a couple of times to congenially and very politely and respectfully break into the conversation, and either I was ignored or I wasn't even heard. Maybe they weren't even opening the lines except for those who had already been, pre-approved and set up for it. But this was going to be my question. I wrote it down just so I wouldn't forget it. I was going to ask the president, as a minister, I've followed with great interest your personal story of faith in Jesus Christ. Christianity has historically taught the intentional taking of nascent human life is supremely immoral. Do you have any personal moral conflict with health reform that obligates people like me to contribute toward paying for abortions? Well, that question was never heard, so I'm posing it to the president now. I know the White House monitors YouTube quite closely, and also our website, because we've heard from them about it. So I'm posing that question to you now, Mr. President, and hoping that maybe you'll have an opportunity to respond to it, as you didn't on the conference call. I will say that, notwithstanding the fact that the president took no comments or questions, it was very interesting to hear him because he said some remarkable things. In fact, a couple of times I was breathless at what the president said, and I wrote them down just to be sure I got them accurately. In one case, he referred to some of his critics on healthcare reform as breaking one of the Ten Commandments. He said there are plenty of people out there who are bearing false witness. Now, that's a direct reference to one of the Ten Commandments and a severe moral and religious indictment. So that's very interesting in itself. But beyond that, in defending his healthcare reform proposals, he said this. He said, of course, he said that uh, any assertion that his proposal provides government funding of abortion is not true. that the talk of these death councils that would ration or withdraw health care from the elderly, for example, were, he said, quote, absolutely not true. These are all fabrications. So he said there is quite a bit of lying going on out there, and he used that term lying. But then he said this, and this was the real kicker. He said this couldn't be true because, and I quote now, it is not the way our religious faith instructs us. Now, the president has repeatedly, publicly, and privately identified himself as a Christian. In fact, in one case, a devout Christian. So I take this to mean his Christianity does not instruct us. He said, quote again, it is not the way our religious faith instructs us. I start the quote there just to be accurate. Not the way our religious faith instructs us. Now, what that left me wondering was, boy, are we going to hear from Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the ACLU, American Atheists, American Free Thought Society, and these other groups who routinely raise a hue and cry, sometimes even file lawsuits, and very often report religious organizations that give politicians like the president a platform to push legislative initiatives, which was clearly the case with this conference call. They routinely will ask the IRS or demand that the IRS rescind those organizations' tax-exempt status. So I'm wondering, are we going to hear about that? Or it just raises a lot of interesting questions. I will say I was glad to be in on the call. I was glad to hear the president speaking live on the call. I wish he would have taken comments and questions. He did not. I wish I would have gotten mine on the table. That did not happen. Only a very few select voices were heard. Nonetheless, it was an interesting exercise. I'm glad the White House did it. It certainly opens up a big conversation about religion and morality. The president has put them front and center in the healthcare debate now, and he has probably brought religion to the fore more so than any other previous administration or executive branch, any president certainly. So this opens up a whole new vista of conversation. I plan to join it. Hope you will too. Let's stand by and see what happens. I'll be blogging some more on it. I've overstayed my welcome. Check in with you a little bit later.